We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Winston Churchill left an undeniably famous legacy. He was destined to be great from the moment he took his first breath. Winston Churchill was born in Blenheim Palace in England on the night of November 30th, 1874, to the great Lord Randolph Churchill and Jenny Jerome. As a child, he was often away from his parents because they were frequently at parties or other social gatherings. Churchill was not bothered by this. He in fact adored his father and mother. But what brought him the most joy as a child was his lead soldiers, which he would order around like he was a 5-star general. But he would eventually substitute his lead soldiers for real men. In the time just before World War II, during the summer of 1939, Winston Churchill began to become frustrated with the government's reluctance to enter into an alliance with the Soviet Union. He was also disturbed by the apparent desire of Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain to come to some sort of agreement with Hitler. Soon the public was calling for Churchill to be appointed to the cabinet. This was unlikely to happen, because Chamberlain believed that Churchill's insertion in the government would discourage his attempts to appease Hitler. At 8:30 on September 1st, Churchill received a phone call as the German armies had entered Poland. Later that day, Churchill drove to London to meet the Prime Minister, who advised him that he would now like him to be part of the government. It was not until 11:15 on September 3rd that Chamberlain sent out a broadcast that said Britain was now at war with Germany. Churchill was to join the War Cabinet as First Lord of the Admiralty. "When he is back," this message was relayed from battleship to battleship. Winston now faced his second major war with Germany. When he returned to his office, he found the same charts he had used when he left May 1915. Churchill was a very active leader. He involved himself in almost every issue, but Winston was convinced that Britain must not be hesitant in its efforts to win the war. Later, Churchill received a most unusual letter from the President of the United States, which said, "What I want you and the Prime Minister to know is that I shall at all times welcome it if you will keep me in touch personally with anything you want me to know about." With cabinet approval, thus began some of the most famous correspondence in history, and an alliance absolutely critical to final victory. The next year in April, the Allied Supreme War Council was agreeing to mine the harbors of Norway, while Hitler was issuing order for the German invasion of the Scandinavian country. Everyone was aware of the importance of Swedish ore to the German war effort, and the Norwegian port Narvik was the port through which most of it was shipped. Churchill wanted to attack German supply lines by floating mines on the Rhine, but the French feared German retaliation. Winston went to Paris to try and convince his allies, but he was unsuccessful. Unfortunately, his trip to Paris delayed the action in Norway, and Chamberlain was unable to take action. While Churchill was away in Paris, and German paratroopers were already being dropped on major centers in Denmark and Norway. Churchill felt that Hitler had committed a grave strategic error, because his forces could now be isolated by the British naval forces. But because of heavy snow and bitter cold weather, British were unable to make an effort. Many people began to question the government, and on May 7th, a parliamentary debate on the war effort began. Amidst this debate, Neville Chamberlain resigned. It seemed the fate of the government was sealed. On May 10th, as the German blitzkrieg was being unleashed against Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France, King George VI summoned Churchill to Buckingham Palace to ask him to form a government. Churchill now had to do something great and save the country as the new Prime Minister. The facts as Churchill saw them would lead to ultimate victory, and as he was to tell the British people, his policy would be victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be, for without victory, there is no survival. In a famous speech to the House of Commons, Churchill says,
"I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat."
Upon becoming Prime Minister, his greatest problem was supervising the withdrawal of Allied troops from the beaches of Dunkirk. In In May, there were 350,000 soldiers that were being bombarded by the Germans in a pocket at Dunkirk on the Channel coast. Churchill needed to get these soldiers out of the jaws of death so they can act on the tasks that lie immediately ahead. Churchill was able to complete this goal greatly. When General Alexander finally left, 335,000 troops had been evacuated, and eventually all of the Britain Army was evacuated. Winston could not have done better. On June 14, Paris fell, and as Hitler prepared to go to Compiègne to accept the French surrender, Churchill sent out his most famous call to arms.
Let us, therefore, brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
The German invasion seemed imminent. The initial threat would come from the air. The Luftwaffe made its first major bombing raid on July 10, 1940. The first line of defense against bombers was Fighter Command, whose commander was Sir Hugh Dowding. Many people wanted Dowding removed, but Churchill had full confidence in him. On July 16th, Hitler issued an order for a landing operation against Britain, which was codenamed Sea Lion. But Churchill was also in the mood for being aggressive. He did know that aid from the United States was critical. Meanwhile, the air war raged overhead. On September 7th, 200 German bombers attacked London. The next day, Churchill walked along the damaged streets. He received responses from people like, "We can take it, give it 'em back." The people looked to Churchill and he responded saying, "Be of good cheer, the time of your deliverance will come. The soul of freedom is deathless. It cannot and will not perish." Although Hitler canceled the operation, the Battle of Britain was all but won by mid-September of 1940, although the bombing still continued. This still in no way diminished Churchill's defiance. Churchill's ambition would eventually lead to his success in World War II. Winston was a great man, one of dignity and strength. Like he said, "We shall never surrender," and Britain never did. Winston faced many challenges and was pushed down many times, but he would not falter. People looked up to him and believed in him, and he did not let them down. Winston was undoubtedly one of the greatest people to ever live. He was not afraid of anything, and it was through him that Britain succeeded.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.